It was the summer of 1968 in Northern California. The Vietnam War raged overseas, protests filled the streets, and the counterculture was thriving in San Francisco. But beneath the era's music, love, and rebellion, a darker story was unfolding, one that would soon grip America in fear and fascination. The story begins on December 20th, 1968, when two teenagers, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, drove out to Lake Herman Road near Vallejo, California, for what should have been an ordinary night. Instead, their car became a crime scene. Both were found shot to death, executed in a manner that suggested the killer had no motive beyond murder itself. There were no signs of robbery, no evidence of sexual assault, just cold, calculated violence. At first, investigators considered it a tragic but random act. Teenagers sometimes attracted trouble, and the rural location made it possible for strangers to happen upon them. But only months later, another attack would shatter any illusion of coincidence. On the night of July 4th, 1969, Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau sat in a parked car at Blue Rock Springs Park, just a few miles from the first murders. Suddenly, another vehicle pulled up. The driver approached with a flashlight, blinding them before opening fire. Michael was critically injured, but he survived. Darlene, tragically, did not. This time, the killer made sure his crime would not go unnoticed. Within an hour of the shooting, a call came into the Vallejo Police Department. The male caller coolly confessed to the Blue Rock Springs attack and claimed responsibility for the Lake Herman Road murders as well. His voice was calm, deliberate, and disturbingly emotionless. For investigators, this was the start of something chilling. This was no ordinary criminal. This was someone who craved attention, who wanted his killings recognized, and who intended to terrify the public. But what they didn't know was that this would only be the beginning of a taunting game, one that would stretch across decades. Just weeks later, local newspapers received cryptic letters signed with a strange symbol, a circle with a cross through it, resembling a gun sight. The writer demanded that the letters be published on the front page, or else more killings would occur. He gave himself a name that would soon become infamous: the Zodiac. These letters contained not only confessions but also strange coded messages. One of his first ciphers, sent to 3 different newspapers, promised to reveal the killer's identity, if anyone could solve it. The chilling reality? He was daring the public, police, and even amateur codebreakers to enter his twisted game. By the end of 1969, the Zodiac would be linked to more murders, more letters, and a growing wave of public panic. The killer seemed to enjoy watching the chaos unfold. He knew the media would amplify his threats. He knew the police would scramble to keep up. And he knew the people of California, ordinary citizens, were left to wonder if they might be next. The Zodiac was no longer just a killer. He was a phantom that haunted the headlines, a faceless predator who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. And with each new murder, each new letter, he grew bolder. But who was he? What drove him? And why, after so many decades, has he remained unidentified? As this story unfolds, we'll explore the terrifying timeline of his crimes, the cryptic clues that continue to puzzle experts, and the suspects who may, or may not, hold the key to unlocking the Zodiac's identity. Because this case isn't just about murder. It's about obsession, codes, and a killer who has managed to keep his secrets for more than half a century. The murders alone were chilling, but what set the Zodiac apart from other killers was his hunger for attention. And his weapon of choice wasn't always a gun or a knife. Sometimes it was a pen. In August 1969, just weeks after the Blue Rock Springs attack, 3 California newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, San Francisco Examiner, and Vallejo Times-Herald, received nearly identical letters. Each began with an ominous statement: "This is the Zodiac speaking." The killer had given himself a name, and with it, an identity. Unlike most criminals who avoided publicity, the Zodiac demanded it. He threatened to kill again if his words weren't printed on the front page of each paper. Attached to the letters was something even more unnerving: a 408-character cipher that he claimed would reveal his true identity. The coded symbols looked like something out of a puzzle book. Rows of circles, squares, triangles, and cryptic shapes. Professional codebreakers struggled to make sense of it. Then, only a week later, a schoolteacher named Donald Harden and his wife Betty cracked the cipher at their kitchen table. But the solution wasn't a confession. Instead, it was a chilling glimpse into the killer's mind. The message read, in part, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." The Zodiac compared murder to hunting, saying humans were the most dangerous animal of all. He promised his victims would be his slaves in the afterlife. And, perhaps most infuriatingly, he never included his real name. The code was a trap, one that baited the police and the public into thinking they'd learn his identity, only to realize it was just another cruel game. Still, the letters kept coming. Dozens would arrive over the years, many written in the same sloppy block handwriting. Some were short taunts, others contained new ciphers. A few included bizarre references to pop culture, like the 1932 film The Most Dangerous Game and even a diagram of a homemade bomb. The most famous letter came in November 1969, the so-called 340 cipher, made up of 340 characters arranged in 20 rows. Unlike the earlier code, this one resisted every attempt to solve it. Law enforcement, amateur cryptographers, and even the CIA failed to break it. For decades, the cipher mocked investigators from its place in police files and newspaper archives. It wasn't until December 2020, over 50 years later, that a team of codebreakers finally cracked the 340 cipher. And even then, it gave no name. Instead, the Zodiac bragged about his crimes and mocked law enforcement for failing to catch him. Beyond the codes, the letters gave police another chilling clue. The killer loved control. He chose when to strike, when to speak, and when to fall silent. He dictated how the media covered him. And every time a new envelope arrived, the public's fear deepened. The Zodiac even began threatening schools, saying he would shoot children as they exited buses. The threats forced parents to keep their kids home, police to escort buses, and newspapers to give the killer front-page coverage. He had turned his crimes into a psychological war against an entire community. But while the letters fascinated the public, they frustrated investigators. They revealed little about the Zodiac's true identity. His spelling errors seemed intentional. His handwriting was inconsistent. And though many letters included his infamous crosshair symbol, handwriting experts couldn't definitively match the notes to any suspect. Was he a genius cryptographer? Or just someone who studied puzzle books and knew enough to toy with the police? Was he educated? Or simply clever at pretending? Each clue raised more questions than answers. By the end of 1969, the Zodiac wasn't just a killer. He was a cultural phenomenon, a mysterious figure whose words could spark headlines and panic with a single envelope. The police were desperate to catch him, but the more they chased, the more he seemed to slip through their fingers. And while the letters captured the world's attention, the murders continued. Each new crime scene seemed to bring more questions, and more taunts from the killer who called himself Zodiac. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. While the Zodiac's letters captured headlines, his murders left real victims behind. Each attack seemed different, random in location, weapon, and style, yet connected by the same chilling signature. Cruelty without clear motive, followed by a mocking message to the press or police. The next confirmed attack came on September 27, 1969, at Lake Berryessa, northeast of Napa. College students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard had driven out to the lake for a relaxing afternoon picnic. As they lay on a blanket by the water, a man approached them wearing a bizarre black hood with cutout eye holes and a white crosshair symbol on his chest. He held them at gunpoint, claiming he had escaped from prison and needed their car and money to flee to Mexico. But instead of taking their belongings, he tied them up and brutally stabbed them with a long knife. Brian survived despite multiple wounds, but Cecilia was fatally injured and later died in the hospital. Before leaving, the killer walked to Brian's car and scrawled a chilling message on the door. The dates of the previous murders, the words "by knife," and, once again, the symbol of the crosshairs. It was as if he wanted to ensure that police and the world would know exactly who was responsible. Just 2 weeks later, on October 11, 1969, the Zodiac struck again in San Francisco. This time, His victim was Paul Stein, a cab driver who picked up a passenger in the city's theater district. The fare was supposed to end near Presidio Heights, an upscale neighborhood. Instead, Stein was shot point-blank in the head. The killer then calmly wiped down the cab, cut away a piece of Stein's bloody shirt, and vanished into the night. Several witnesses, including a group of teenagers watching from a nearby house, saw him leave the scene. They described him as a stocky white male, about 35 to 45 years old, with glasses. Police responded quickly and even encountered a man fitting that description walking near the crime scene. But due to a communication error, officers were told to look for a black suspect. They let the man go, possibly letting the Zodiac slip right through their fingers. Days later, the San Francisco Chronicle received another letter. This one included a piece of Paul Stein's shirt, proof that the writer was indeed the killer. In the letter, the Zodiac threatened to shoot schoolchildren, boasting that he could pick them off as they came bouncing out. The threat sent shockwaves across the city, forcing police escorts on school buses and filling parents with terror. By now, the Zodiac wasn't just a local story, he was a national obsession. Newspapers across the country reported his crimes. Talk shows debated his motives. Amateur sleuths began forming theories, trying to solve his puzzles from their own homes. And for Californians living in his hunting ground, daily life was colored by fear. The randomness of his attacks made him especially terrifying. He targeted couples in secluded areas, then a cab driver in a busy city street. His methods changed too. A gun in one case, a knife in another. This unpredictability meant anyone could be a target, anywhere, at any time. But the Zodiac seemed to thrive on this chaos. Each murder was followed by a new letter. Each threat was amplified in headlines. And each time the police thought they had a lead, it dissolved into dead ends. By the close of 1969, the Zodiac had claimed multiple lives, terrified entire communities, and become one of the most infamous criminals in American history. Yet he was still a shadow, seen by witnesses, described in detail, but never caught. The question was no longer just who the Zodiac was, but whether he could ever be stopped. And as the 1970s began, the killer showed no signs of slowing down. By the early 1970s, the Zodiac had become more than a killer. He was a riddle wrapped in fear, taunts, and coded messages. The crimes had drawn national attention, but investigators were no closer to finding the man behind the crosshair symbol. Leads poured in, suspects emerged, but every trail seemed to end the same way, in doubt. The most infamous suspect was Arthur Lee Allen, a former schoolteacher from Vallejo. Allen fit the general description given by witnesses. He had a disturbing background, allegations of inappropriate behavior with children, a fascination with weapons, and even a wristwatch brand called Zodiac. When questioned, Allen offered inconsistent stories, and police found it suspicious that he often carried knives and firearms. Even more damning, Allen's friend reported that he had once talked about wanting to kill couples and disguise crimes as Zodiac-style attacks. For many, it seemed like the puzzle had been solved. But despite years of investigation, handwriting samples, fingerprints, and even DNA tests failed to link Allen definitively to the Zodiac letters or crime scenes. He died in 1992, and many still debate whether he was the true killer or just an unsettling man who happened to resemble him. Another theory centered around law enforcement or military ties. Some investigators believed the precision of the attacks, the codes, and the knowledge of firearms pointed to someone with training. The Zodiac's taunts often included military-style language, and his use of ciphers suggested at least some exposure to cryptography. Could he have been a disgruntled serviceman? A frustrated police officer? The idea only deepened the paranoia. Over the years, dozens of names surfaced. Richard Gajkowski, a journalist, Rick Marshall, a radio operator, and even Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. Each suspect had traits that seemed to align with the Zodiac: eccentric behavior, access to cryptographic skills, or proximity to crime scenes. Yet in every case, concrete evidence was missing. DNA analysis later ruled out several prime suspects when technology advanced in the 2000s. Partial DNA profiles recovered from the back of Zodiac's letters excluded Allen and others. leaving investigators once again at square one. But skeptics argue that the DNA might have come from a postal worker or secretary handling the letters, making it unreliable. Meanwhile, the Zodiac ciphers kept fueling speculation. Amateur sleuths pored over the unsolved codes, convinced they might hold the killer's identity. The 340 cipher, cracked in 2020, reignited interest but offered no breakthrough. Just more taunting words from a man who had outsmarted investigators for half a century. And then there are the wild theories. Some believe the Zodiac was more than one person, a group working together to spread fear. Others think he stopped killing or moved on to crimes elsewhere under a new alias. A few even suggest he's still alive, watching the endless speculation about his crimes. The FBI and local police kept Zodiac files open for decades, but every promising lead turned cold. Handwriting experts disagreed on the letters. Witness descriptions varied. And because the Zodiac was unpredictable, police couldn't establish a consistent pattern to trap him. For the victims' families, this endless cycle of suspects and theories meant no closure. Each time a new name was floated in the media, it offered hope, only to dissolve when the evidence didn't hold up. The mystery became as much about frustration as fear. By the late 1970s, the Zodiac's confirmed murders had stopped, but letters, some authentic, some questionable, still trickled in. Whether the real killer was still alive or had simply gone silent, nobody knew. And with every year that passed, the legend of the Zodiac grew larger, while the truth seemed to slip further away. The mystery had all the elements of a nightmare. A faceless predator, a trail of bodies, coded confessions, and a long list of suspects with no definitive answer. For investigators, it was a riddle they couldn't solve. For the public, it became one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Decades have passed since the Zodiac's last confirmed attack, yet his shadow still lingers over America. Few killers in history have managed to terrorize the public, manipulate the media, and evade capture as completely as the man who signed his letters with a crosshair. The Zodiac's crimes remain an open wound in Northern California. Families of the victims, Betty Lou Jensen, David Faraday, Darlene Ferrin, Cecilia Shepard, Paul Stein, and possibly others, never received justice. For them, the case isn't just a mystery. It's a lifetime of unanswered questions. Who was he? Why did he target their loved ones? And why has no one been able to unmask him? Beyond the grief, the Zodiac left a mark on culture itself. He became a symbol of unsolved evil, a puzzle that outlived its creator. Books, documentaries, and even Hollywood films like Zodiac 2007 have kept his story alive for new generations. Each retelling brings the same chilling realization. We still don't know who he was. What makes the Zodiac so haunting isn't just the brutality of his murders. It's the fact that he turned killing into a game. He wanted fame, attention, and control. He played with the press, mocked police, and dared the public to solve his ciphers. In many ways, he was one of the first criminals to understand how fear spreads through media, long before the age of the internet. Even today, new technologies and amateur sleuths keep the case alive. The 2020 decryption of the 340 cipher proved that persistence could crack even the Zodiac's toughest puzzles. Investigators now use advanced DNA testing and genealogy databases, hoping for a breakthrough like the one that caught the Golden State Killer. Yet, as of today, the Zodiac remains unnamed. And perhaps that is part of his enduring power. A solved case becomes history, an unsolved one becomes legend. The Zodiac Killer continues to fascinate because he embodies the questions that true crime enthusiasts and investigators alike can't resist. Who was he? How did he escape justice? And could the answer still be out there, waiting to be discovered? In the end, the Zodiac's legacy is not just in the crimes he committed, but in the silence he left behind. His words, his symbols, and his crimes continue to echo through time, daring us to solve the riddle. For over 50 years, he has remained both everywhere and nowhere. A phantom who turned murder into a puzzle that the world still hasn't solved.